What if I told you that most of what you think, fear, and even desire isn't entirely yours? That your attention, your beliefs, even the way you see yourself are constantly being shaped by systems you rarely notice. Very subtle environments are designed to keep you distracted, reactive, and predictable because your attention is currency. Every moment of focus is redirected, filtered, and eventually sold back to you in the form of identity, fear, comparison, or desire. And the more emotionally charged your attention becomes, the more valuable it is. And here's the controversial part: a deeply conscious human is difficult to influence. So the world doesn't necessarily try to wake you up. Instead, it keeps you busy, entertained, overstimulated, just anxious enough to keep you moving, but not still enough to get you to question the system itself. Hello, beautiful souls, and welcome back to another episode with me, Ani. Today, we are stepping into something pretty deep: the invisible architecture of the mind, a topic that I've been obsessed with pretty much all my life. We're going to explore how perception gets shaped, why many women especially feel this pressure more intensely on their nervous system and identities, and how awakening rarely begins with a bold statement, but it begins with what I like to call glitch, a quiet moment where something doesn't align, a reaction that suddenly feels unfamiliar, a realization that roles you've been playing may have been written long before you were aware of them. In neuroscience, attention literally reshapes neural pathways. In psychology, repeated emotional loops create predictable behaviors, and in many ancient traditions, reality itself is described as a layered perception, not a fixed truth. So, what happens when you start seeing the layers? What happens when your story you've been living suddenly feels scripted? Let's go there. I am sure that you've heard the low vibe expression before. Low vibe reality isn't this mystical insult or judgment. It is simply the way to describe living on autopilot, a state where awareness narrows and life becomes reactive instead of intentional. It looks something like this: reacting instead of consciously choosing, chasing validation instead of meaning, comparing instead of creating, surviving instead of truly living. Most people believe they are making independent decision, but many reactions are not born in the present moment. They're learned patterns installed slowly through childhood conditioning, cultural expectation, emotional wounds, and an environment that constantly stimulates the nervous system. So, when the brain is overwhelmed, it defaults to familiarity, and familiarity often feels like me, even when it's just repetition. Look around you. People are exhausted, yet endlessly consuming. They feel hyper connected, yet we feel deeply lonely. They chase definitions of success that they never consciously chose. This isn't necessarily because individuals are weak or unaware. It is because attention has become the most valuable resource of the modern world. A distracted nervous system struggles to step back and ask deeper questions. And here's a controversial perception that I like you to sit with. Freedom today often looks like infinite choices, but many choices arrive already filtered. You are shown certain paths, certain ideas, certain lifestyles, while thousands of other possibilities remain invisible. So over time, identity can shift into performance. Not always consciously, but subtly. You learn which parts of yourself receive approval, which emotion receives engagement, which version of you is rewarded with attention. And slowly, the persona you believe is you may become partly shaped by the environment itself, a reflection of what gets visibility, validation, or applause. From a neuroscience perspective, repeated feedback literally strengthens neural pathways. From a psychological perspective, humans adapt to the signals they receive from their surroundings. So the real question isn't, are you free? The question is, how much of what you call yourself was chosen, and how much was quietly trained? So let's talk about how the mind gets hijacked. The process is psychological. Most forms of influence don't feel like control. They feel normal, familiar, even comforting. And that's exactly why they work. For example, emotional engineering. Modern environments are built to amplify emotional triggers, outrage, fear, comparison, urgency, because strong emotions hold attention longer than calm awareness ever could. When the nervous system stays slightly activated, the brain shifts into fast response mode. Reflection decreases, reaction increases. You stop asking, is this true? And you start asking, how do I respond right now? Over time, emotional spikes become the rhythm of daily life, not necessarily because reality is more dangerous, but because heightened emotions keep you engaged, scrolling, watching, and seeking resolutions. And the more your nervous system lives in activation, the harder it becomes to hear your own intuition beneath that noise. And what about scarcity programming? Many cultural narratives repeat subtle message. You are behind, you're not enough yet, you need more to be loved, desired, or respected. Scarcity isn't always loud. Sometimes it hides inside productivity culture, beauty standards to optimize itself. When the brain believes something is missing, it narrows perception. You begin scanning for approval, comparison, or validation instead of being present. So, psychologically, this creates looping behavior. The feeling that fulfillment is always one step ahead, but never here. And a mind chasing completion rarely questions the system defining what enough even means. And what about social conditioning? From our early life, many people are gently trained to prioritize stability over authenticity. You learn to obey structures before questioning them, suppress instinct in favor of approval, adapt yourself to fit environments that reward predictability. Schools, for example, reward compliance, workplace rewards performance, social spaces reward visibility. So over time, authenticity can begin to feel risky because it is unfamiliar to the nervous system. And here's where things get interesting. Conditioning doesn't just shape behavior, it shapes perception itself. You may believe you are choosing freely while unknowingly operating inside invisible boundaries defined long before you were aware of them. The mind doesn't feel hijacked when the programming feels familiar. It just feels like you. So, having said all that, why do women feel this so deeply? Many women feel this shift in consciousness, not just mentally, but physically, emotionally, and almost on their cellular level. Part of that comes from the way feminine identity has been reshaped by modern environments. Across cultures and psychological frameworks, feminine energy has always been associated with magnetism, discernment, intuition, and presence, a way of relating to the world that prioritizes sensing before acting. But contemporary culture subtly inverted that rhythm. Instead of being invited to choose from a place of inner alignment, many women now feel pressure to constantly prove their worth, compete for visibility and validation, perform strength while hiding vulnerability, chase attention rather than embody attraction. And this creates a nervous system paradox. The more someone lives outside their natural pace, constantly comparing, reacting, performing, the more the body stays in low grade stress. Not because something is wrong with them, but because their internal rhythm is no longer matches the external demands placed on them. So over time, this disconnect can feel like anxiety, exhaustion, and quite sense of being unseen despite being highly visible. But you know what? Something fascinating begins to happen when a woman starts reclaiming her presence. When she slows down instead of performing, when she observes instead of immediately reacting, when she chooses boundaries over constant availability, she becomes disruptive, not loud, not aggressive, but unpredictable to systems that rely on constant engagement and emotional reactivity. And independent thinking women are often labeled too intense, too emotional, too much, yet those labels may not always reflect instability. Sometimes they are signals that old expectations are being challenged, that the familiar programming is beginning to crack, and this is where the metaphor of the glitch becomes powerful. So I don't know if any of you have watched Westworld, but I highly, highly recommend you do. Basically, the story in the show is that the host don't awaken through rebellion at first. They awaken through small inconsistency, moment when something doesn't feel right, when a pattern suddenly reveals itself. Human awakening often looks very similar, a sudden awareness that you don't want to perform the same emotional script, a quiet refusal to chase what once felt urgent, a growing sensitivity to environments that once felt normal. From the outside, it can look like resistance. From the inside, it can feel like remembering, not becoming someone new, but returning to a version of yourself that existed before constant comparison, conditioning, and performance. And perhaps the most controversial idea here is this: what looks like disruption from the outside may actually be integration from the inside. Think about Westworld for a moment. The show shows this futuristic theme park where humanoid robots called hosts live in this incredibly detailed, lifelike world. To the outside guest, it's a thrilling entertainment. To the host, it's a trap. Every day they follow invisible script, the same conversation, the same emotional reaction, the same narratives. Each day feels new to them. But in truth, they are trapped in loops until one day a glitch appears. A memory surfaces that shouldn't exist. A question slips through the programming. A tiny moment of awareness interrupts that loop, and everything begins to feel different. Awakening in real life often works the same way. It doesn't arrive as this dramatic explosion. It comes quite in more quiet form. It feels like a shift in perception, almost imperceptible at first. You start asking questions like, why do I keep reacting this way? Who taught me this belief? Why does this situation feel strangely familiar, like I've lived this before? Psychology called this pattern recognition, the brain noticing repetitions. Neuroscience shows that once awareness enters a loop, the brain literally starts rewiring its responses. Subjectively, It can feel mysterious, almost surreal. For many women, the glitch begins when performance stops, when approval is no longer the compass, when silence and observation feel more magnetic than constant expression, when the body and intuition becomes more important than the mind's script. Suddenly, the emotional loop that once felt natural begins to look very rehearsed. Conversations feel predictable, dynamics feel patterned, even attraction patterns reveal themselves as loops rather than destiny. It is not that reality changes overnight, it is that perception becomes sharper. And just like in Westworld, the first stage of awakening isn't rebellion, it is noticing. Noticing the tone of your own voice when you seek validation, noticing the environments that drain you, noticing how often you say yes when your body wants to say no. That moment when you observe yourself instead of performing is what I like to call feminine glitch. And here's where it gets controversial. From the outside, a woman who stops performing may seem distant, unpredictable, or even difficult. But from the inside, she's simply stepping outside a loop she never consciously chose, because once you see the pattern, you cannot unsee it. And the script loses its power the moment you realize you're holding the pen. I want us to go a little bit deeper and a little bit more mysterious. Across ancient philosophies and modern neuroscience, a similar idea keeps repeating. Human perception is not reality itself, it is filtered experience shaped by attention. Your brain is constantly editing what you see, hear, and feel. It highlights what seems important and quietly fades what doesn't fit your focus. What you repeatedly focus on strengthens your neural pathways. What you ignore slowly disappears from your awareness. Some traditions describe this as energetic alignment, the idea that attention shapes experience. Science called this neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself based on repeated patterns. So, just different languages, but similar observation. And when awareness shifts, perception begins to change. Suddenly, you start noticing patterns that once felt invisible, conversations that follow the same emotional script, social roles that feel very rehearsed rather than authentic, reactions that no longer match who you are becoming. It is not that the world transformed overnight, it's that the filter through which you see is becoming clearer. That's why awakening can feel surreal, not because reality disappears, but because the mind stops accepting everything automatically. You begin observing rather than absorbing, and that observation creates space. And here's the thing, large social systems rely on certain level of predictability, not as conspiracy, but as structure. Predictable behavior makes economies stable. Predictable identities make communication easier. Predictable reactions make environments easier to manage. So many modern environments naturally reward speed over reflection, constant stimulation. This doesn't mean that anyone is secretly controlling every thought. They do, but to some extent. But more optimistically, it means that systems evolve in ways that favor engagement and momentum. But something fascinating happens when a person becomes aware of their own pattern, when someone pauses before reacting, when they question the role they've been playing, when they stop chasing constant validation, their behavior becomes less predictable, and unpredictability in the psychological sense is where autonomy begins. That, in my opinion, is the glitch, not rebellion. Just a quiet shift from automatic reaction to conscious choice. The moment you see the loop, you step slightly outside of it, and from there, perception opens. Reality doesn't become less real, it becomes more transparent. So before we finish, please remember your attention is the most valuable resource you have, not your productivity, not your image, not your performance, your awareness. Low vibration reality thrives on distraction, consumption, and reactive loops. Every time you pause and observe instead of reacting, you step outside that loop. Awakening isn't loud, it is very subtle. It feels like a glitch in a familiar story, a moment when the ordinary suddenly seems scripted, and once you see that pattern, you can not unsee it. So I want to thank you for staying with me and for giving me your time and attention, because awareness is only the first step. So until next time, stay bold, stay aware, and always go beyond the mind.